On June 5, 2025, Canada awoke to a quiet anxiety. The air was heavy with a sense of anticipation, as if the country itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Housing prices were high, inflation lingered, and people worried about jobs and interest rates. Everyday Canadians felt the pinch at the grocery store and the gas pump, wondering how much further their paychecks would stretch. The national mood was fragile, hope and apprehension in uneasy balance. There was a sense that things could tip either way, that the smallest change might send ripples through the country. In Ottawa, Parliament debated the economy as usual, with Trudeau's government defending its record. The opposition pressed for answers, but the routine felt almost comforting in its predictability. Across Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, life went on, unaware of the coming shock. People hurried to work, children went to school, and the rhythm of daily life continued, undisturbed. Relations with the U.S. under President Trump had always been tense, but manageable. There were disagreements, but both sides had learned to keep the peace, at least on the surface. Canadian officials thought they'd learned to navigate the unpredictability. Years of experience had taught them to expect surprises, but also to trust in diplomacy and established agreements. But nothing prepared them for what was about to happen. The warning signs were subtle, easy to dismiss, until they weren't. Most Canadians were preoccupied with daily concerns, gas prices, hockey scores. The news cycle churned on, but few suspected that history was about to turn. The idea of a new trade war with the U.S. seemed like history, not a real threat. Memories of past disputes had faded, replaced by a sense of security and old alliances. The North American Trade Agreement was supposed to guarantee stability. It was a foundation everyone relied on, a promise that cross-border chaos was a thing of the past. No one imagined it could be undone overnight. The thought was almost unthinkable, a scenario reserved for fiction or distant history, yet the storm was gathering just south of the border. In Washington, decisions were being made that would soon send shockwaves north. The foundation of Canadian prosperity was about to be shaken. Industries that had thrived for decades stood unknowingly on the edge of uncertainty. The unthinkable was about to become reality. The countdown had begun, though few realized how little time was left. The quiet anxieties of a Canadian morning were about to be replaced by panic. The sense of normalcy was about to shatter, replaced by confusion and fear. In a matter of hours, everything would change. The country would be forced to confront a new reality, one that no one had truly prepared for. The country was about to face a crisis unlike any in recent memory. Leaders would be tested, and ordinary Canadians would have to adapt overnight. The calm before the storm was over. The first drops had begun to fall, and there was no turning back. Canada was about to be tested. The nation would need resilience, unity, and courage to weather what was coming. The news broke suddenly, catching everyone off guard. Phones buzzed, TV screens flashed. President Trump was imposing a sweeping, unprecedented 25% tariff on all Canadian imports, sending shockwaves across the country. Disbelief swept the country. Was it a mistake, a bluff, or something even more serious? People everywhere tried to process what this could mean for their daily lives, but it was real. The tariff would take effect in just 30 days, leaving little time to prepare for the fallout. The economic partnership with the U.S., built over decades, was now under direct assault, threatening the very foundation of cross-border trade. The Toronto Stock Exchange plunged, billions of dollars vanished in minutes. The loonie tumbled to new lows, rattling investors and ordinary Canadians alike. Panic spread from boardrooms to living rooms as uncertainty gripped both business leaders and families. Business leaders stared in shock. Supply chains, markets, and jobs were all at risk. Factory workers wondered if their livelihoods would survive the coming storm. News channels went to wall-to-wall coverage, updating viewers by the minute as the story unfolded. Experts warned of economic devastation, soaring prices, layoffs, and a looming recession. The ripple effects would touch every corner of the country. Suddenly, trade policy was personal. Jobs, mortgages, and groceries were on the line. Everyday Canadians faced the reality of higher costs and uncertain futures. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Trudeau received the news mid-meeting, his expression turning grave as the implications became clear. The government's agenda was instantly obsolete. Priorities shifted in a heartbeat as officials scrambled to respond. This was a crisis of the highest order, threatening both prosperity and sovereignty. Parliament convened an emergency session, searching for answers. Trudeau's composure was tested as the nation looked to him for answers, his words carrying the weight of a nation in turmoil. His advisors were just as stunned, urgently debating next steps as the clock ticked down. The showdown with the US had begun, and tensions ran high on both sides of the border. The stakes could not have been higher. Every decision now would shape the country's future for years to come. Canada was thrust into a fight for its economic future, with workers, businesses, and families all caught in the crossfire. The country braced for impact, preparing for the unknown as uncertainty loomed large. The nation's confidence was shaken to its core as Canadians everywhere wondered what tomorrow would bring. Inside the historic Langevin bloc, the heart of Canada's federal government, tension was mounting. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called an urgent high-stakes emergency meeting, summoning his top advisors and ministers to confront a crisis that threatened the nation's stability. Around the table, ministers and advisors pored over grim economic projections. If a 25% tariff was imposed, it would devastate every sector, from manufacturing to agriculture, and ripple through the entire economy. The deeply integrated North American economy meant that the pain would be both widespread and immediate, affecting workers, families, and businesses on both sides of the border. The government had to act quickly, but every possible option carried enormous risks and potential consequences. Politically, Trudeau was in a vulnerable position. His public approval ratings were already low, and the stakes had never been higher. The opposition in Parliament demanded a strong, decisive response. Retaliation risked economic disaster, while diplomacy risked appearing weak and indecisive to the public. Engaging in a trade war with the United States was a dangerous gamble that could spiral out of control, with unpredictable consequences for millions. On the other hand, diplomacy meant negotiating with an unpredictable White House, where every conversation was fraught with uncertainty and shifting demands. Retaliation would mean higher prices for ordinary Canadians at the grocery store, and even more pain for small businesses already struggling to survive. Trudeau found himself trapped between the threat of economic ruin and the risk of political humiliation, with no clear path forward. The nation's future truly hung in the balance, as Canadians anxiously watched the unfolding drama. Every move Trudeau made would define not just his government but his personal legacy. The pressure on him was immense and unrelenting. The government weighed every word, every action, knowing that even the smallest misstep could have lasting consequences. There were no good choices, only hard ones. The clock was ticking, and the world was watching. The crisis deepened as new details emerged from Washington. The tariffs were leverage. Trump demanded stricter asylum policies, billions for border surveillance, and expanded U.S. security powers in Canada. This was no longer just about trade, it was a direct challenge to Canadian sovereignty. Accepting the demands would mean surrendering control over Canadian laws and borders. The backlash would be fierce. Trudeau risked being seen as the prime minister who sold out the country. Refusing meant facing economic disaster. Trump's demands were designed to humiliate and force Canada's hand. The crisis became a test of national pride and independence. Canadians felt indignation and anger. The friendship with the U.S. now seemed one-sided and abusive. The debate was no longer just about economics, it was about who Canada was as a nation. The country split over how to respond. In Ottawa, Trudeau's cabinet was divided. Some urged diplomacy, others demanded retaliation. The Hawks wanted targeted tariffs to hit Trump's political base. Doves warned a trade war would devastate Canadian jobs and families. The public was just as divided. Some called for boycotts and invoked national pride. Others, worried about their livelihoods, pleaded for calm and compromise. Social media exploded with patriotic hashtags and heated arguments. The crisis exposed a deep fault line in the Canadian psyche. National honor clashed with economic pragmatism. The opposition blamed Trudeau for the crisis, fueling division. The country was at war with itself over how to handle the U.S. threat. The debate grew toxic and polarized. Canada's unity was under strain as never before. The 30-day deadline loomed, and the effects were immediate. Businesses froze hiring and investment, bracing for impact. Layoff plans quietly circulated in manufacturing and agriculture. Prices at the checkout began to rise. Produce, car parts, and everyday goods all cost more. For families, the crisis was now personal. Grocery trips became stressful, budgets stretched thin. The trade dispute was a tax on daily life. Public anger grew, but it turned inward as well as outward. Supporters of retaliation clashed with those fearing job losses. The political opposition fanned the flames, blaming government missteps. Summer plans were canceled, home purchases delayed. The sense of security that defined the middle class began to erode. Canadians realized their dependence on the U.S. was a vulnerability. The nation felt under siege by both external threats and internal anxieties. The future had never felt more uncertain. The tariff crisis became a national reckoning, shaking the country's sense of security. Canada was forced to confront its economic vulnerability and deep dependence on the US, a reality that could no longer be ignored. Trudeau's leadership was on the line. His response would define his legacy for years to come. The crisis sparked debate about Canadian identity and the urgent need for a more independent path. Calls grew louder to diversify trade and build a truly resilient economy. The showdown was a painful wake-up call for the entire nation. The outcome remained uncertain. Retaliation or diplomacy, defiance or compromise hung in the balance. But one thing was clear: Canada would never be the same after this moment. The crisis exposed the fragility of alliances and the true price of sovereignty. It was a lesson learned the hard way, etched into the nation's memory. The nation's resolve was tested, and ultimately strengthened by adversity. The path forward was unclear, but Canada was determined to find it, together as one people.